Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears and talk a little college football. Let me say this. Let me talk big picture, existential stuff. Let me go deep on you right now here on the Aaron Torres Pod. So there are sometimes, a lot of times, June historically, for what I do, is the single slowest month in sports. There's just, you talk college sports, June is just, there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing. College hoops is done, transfer portal's done, rosters are set, but it's not really that time yet where we really dive full speed ahead into college football. But every once in a while, the content gods, to their credit, do give me some good content here in June, which is the slowest month, and that is exactly what happened on Thursday. Why Thursday? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It is because on Thursday, the number one high school football player in the class of 2023, who I would argue is maybe the most touted high school football player that I have ever seen, made his college decision. That player, of course, is Arch Manning, grandson of Archie Manning, son of Cooper Manning, nephew of Eli and Peyton Manning. You may have heard of him. Arch Manning made his college decision. He was down to 3 schools: Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. And on Thursday, drum roll please, what college did he pick? Arch Manning, the number one high school player in America, grandson of Archie, son of Cooper, nephew of Eli and Peyton, chose the University of Texas. The eyes of Texas are upon us. That is right. How about Steve Sarkisian? How about the Texas Longhorns? Insert your own Texas is back commentary here. With that said, this is legitimately fascinating. Sometimes a kid commits and it's just whatever, right? Like Trevor Lawrence committing to Clemson. That's cool. But Clemson won a national championship. You see why. But the confluence of Arch Manning, Steve Sarkisian, and Texas, it is fascinating, and there's so much to discuss. So let's break it all down, soup to nuts. Let's just get into it, okay? So first of all, what I would say is, as weird as it sounded, and I think a lot of people, if you weren't following the recruitment closely, if you're just a fan of whatever, Kentucky or USC or Oklahoma, and you knew your school wasn't really in the mix, you might see Texas and you might be shocked. But if you really followed this recruitment, it actually was kind of trending that way. And it actually, in many ways, does make a lot of sense. First of all, as I said, the final 3, about a month ago, Arch kind of cut his list to 3, took 3 official visits: Alabama, Georgia, and Texas. Well, Alabama, shortly after Arch Manning cut his list to 3, they actually picked up a commitment from another quarterback in the class of 2023, Eli Holstein. At that point, it felt like Alabama, they're not officially off the list, but they're pretty much not really in the running. Arch still took his official visit. But even Alabama fans were like, we're happy with Eli Holstein. We like him. We're ready to move forward with him. If we don't get Arch Manning, it's not the end of the world. Georgia's an interesting one because, about a week or so ago, I think somebody asked me in the Wednesday mailbag show, what would Arch Manning mean to Georgia? And what I said was, I do think he could be weirdly a game changer for Georgia in that he would give them that elite quarterback that could make up for the deficiencies if there is a given year where Georgia doesn't have an elite defense, where Georgia's run game isn't as good, where their O-line isn't as good. But I also kind of said, I'd be careful if I was Arch Manning. The one hole in Kirby Smart's resume, and you can't criticize him too much, he's just won a national championship in case you didn't hear, is that he hasn't developed quarterbacks. Obviously, Jacob Eason leaves, ends up going to the NFL. Jake Fromm never really got better in the program, and I think the guy you have to look at is Justin Fields. Justin Fields is an incredible quarterback, but he looked a lot different playing under Kirby Smart than he did playing under Ryan Day. And I understand that since Justin Fields left, they brought in Todd Monken, they kind of modernized the offense, whatever. I still think it is a legitimately big risk that you're taking because even if you go back and look at Stetson Bennett's numbers from last year, Georgia never really opened up the offense. In the regular season, they were just destroying everybody, and Stetson Bennett didn't have to throw the ball. And in the national championship, I think he had a few good good, series, good quarters, whatever. But it wasn't like he put Georgia on his back. So the point I'm trying to get to with Arch, I always kind of questioned if Georgia really made sense for him. Texas, though, I understand the idea. They're coming off a 5-7 season. They're Texas. They have struggled for a very long time. They have underachieved for a very long time. They are coming off a year where they had 0 NFL draft picks. I could understand the argument against Texas, and if you want to make that argument, I'm not going to fight it. But what I would also say is, one, once he got to 3, this is where it seemed to be going. But also there are things about Texas that make sense as to why you would pick Texas if you're Arch Manning. One, he's got a multi-year relationship with Steve Sarkisian dating back to Sark's days as the offensive coordinator at Alabama. It's a 3-4 year relationship. This isn't, and we're going to get into the NIL in a minute, this isn't just a head coach throwing a bag of cash and saying, come play for me. Legitimate relationship with Steve Sarkisian. Beyond that, I understand Texas was bad, but you can criticize Sark for a lot of things. Game day, what has he really done, da-da-da-da. He's a great developer of quarterbacks, and we know the guys that have worked under him. He turned Mac Jones into one of the great quarterbacks statistically for at least one season in the history of college football. Even Texas last year, as bad as they were, the offense, despite multiple quarterbacks, despite injuries, despite all sorts of stuff, the offense was pretty good throughout the year. And so you have a 4-year relationship with Sark. You have a situation where he's one of the great quarterback developers in college football. I'd add the timeline actually works out very well. And I'll say this, I was genuinely stunned at how many people do not seem to understand the concept of eligibility clocks when it comes to college football players. Why do I bring it up? Obviously, Quinn Ewers, who was the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2021, went to Ohio State, transferred to Texas. He will be technically probably a redshirt freshman this year because he didn't play last year. But he is draft eligible 2 years from now. And so the timeline makes sense. Arch Manning comes in. Day 1, he doesn't have to be the starter. He can sit behind another guy in Quinn Ewers, learn the system, learn the offense, all that good stuff. And if Quinn Ewers is as good as we think he is, then Arch Manning is going to take that job from him because Quinn Ewers, after 3 years, is going to go to the NFL. And if Quinn Ewers isn't as good as we think he is, well, guess what? It's going to be time to move along because Arch Manning is going to come in. So I was stunned by people that were like, well, why is he going there? Quinn Ewers will still be there. It's like most guys don't want the pressure of going in and having to win the job on day 1. Trevor Lawrence, as I just referenced a minute ago, he eventually took the job from Kelly Bryant. But never forget, Tua, as great as he was, sat behind Jalen Hurts for a year. Bryce Young sat behind Mac Jones for a year. So I don't think most kids, they want to play early, but I don't think they want the pressure of going somewhere where they have to start day 1. And so Quinn Ewers will be eligible for 1 year. He'll be a junior when Arch gets there. And then the idea is Quinn Ewers goes to the NFL and Arch takes over. And so when you factor in all of that stuff, it makes perfect sense as to why Arch Manning chose Texas. One last thought before we get into what it all means in the bigger picture. Well, 2 things really. One, can we stop with the, well, it must have been NIL related? Please stop with the NIL stuff. Listen, if you don't like Texas, I get it. It's okay. I'm not offended. I'm not a Texas fan. I don't care. But Arch Manning's family has more money than the people who run Live Golf, okay? I don't think Arch Manning is waiting for the bag from Steve Sarkisian. He's going there because Steve Sarkisian's a heck of a quarterbacks coach. He has a 4-year relationship with him. And there is one other factor that I do think is important here. I just mentioned, could be a starter by 2024, and really could, you would think, take off as a junior in 2025. Well, what is 2025? Let's just think about that. Let's do some mental math. 2025 is probably the first year that Texas plays in the SEC. To me, that matters. Listen, surprise, surprise, I wasn't in Steve Sarkisian's recruiting meetings with Arch, but my guess is he said, look, you're not only going to be the face of Texas football, but you're very likely going to be the starter when we go into the SEC. And so whether that's who knows what the SEC is going to look like at that point, but whether it's a conference championship, whether it's a playoff appearance, who knows if we have an expanded playoff by then, you're going to be the face of the program. And if you elevate this program at the time that we go into the SEC, that's like legendary build you a statue kind of stuff. And so we could criticize Texas, but it makes perfect sense. Now, with that said, let's get into the bigger part of this. What does it mean for Texas? What's realistic? What's not? This is where it gets really fascinating to me. I think the commitment itself makes sense, but this is the part where it gets absolutely fascinating to me. First of all, for Texas, you can't spin it any other way. This is a huge, mega recruiting win. It's always a big win when you get a 5-star QB to commit, but when you get the most notable QB with the most notable name from the most notable family in football history, that is huge. You can try to tear down Texas or rip them today. If I'm a Texas fan, I'm sitting there saying, screw you, we got Arch, let's go, let's rock, right? And I think the benefits that come with this are obviously, we all know what they are. When you get a commitment from a 5-star quarterback, what does that mean? It usually means, in general, that other good players are going to want to play with him. And so now Arch Manning becomes your lead recruiter, again, the most prominent quarterback recruit in years from the most prominent football family, has now committed to Texas, and he is now recruiting on your behalf. Elite 11 camp is next week. I don't know if he's going to be there. I actually think he might not be there. But everywhere he goes from now on, he's wearing that Texas hat. Whenever he goes to these camps with other elite players, he can get on the phone. He can text. He can talk to kids when the coaching staff can't. And we all know how important this, getting a 5-star recruit is for a college football program at the quarterback position and what it means. What I would also say is, if you want to say, there's no doubt that it's a positive. But what I would also say is, it does make things interesting from Texas's perspective. Because I do think a couple things. One, people are asking me, will he end up, he's going to end up in the transfer portal. It's like, forget the transfer portal. You know what the most interesting thing that I think about this commitment is? What happens if Texas isn't good this year? I mean, you talk about how intense his recruitment was now. Imagine if Texas goes 4-8 or 5-7 like they did last year. Now, I don't think they will. But imagine if Texas goes 5-7 this year. Imagine if in December he sees that and he knows that Steve Sarkisian is either going to get fired or will be very much on the hot seat going into his freshman year. That is the most interesting element of this. What if Texas isn't good this year? You commit now, it helps the recruiting class. And I do think in many ways, this probably, I saw actually Dennis Dodd from CBS say this, and I think he's right. I do think that this right here probably gets Steve Sarkisian to 2023, right? Even if Texas is terrible this year, you're not going to fire Sark when you have the most transformative recruit, or at least the biggest name recruit in high school football committed to you for next year. So this probably buys Sark at least until 2023, but that's the most interesting element to me. If Texas goes 8-4 this year, okay, cool, whatever. But if Texas goes 4-8, if Texas goes 5-7, and Arch sits there and says, this head coach might only have a year when I get there. If we don't win next year, he might be out. Isn't it all possible that he reopens his recruitment? And so to me, that's what the most interesting part of this whole conversation is. It's not why he committed, it's what it means for Texas in the big picture. Because I believe this decision will both make or break the Steve Sarkisian era, and I believe that this decision will very much impact just Texas football over the next 5 to 7 years as they transition into the SEC. If this thing works out, it's big. If it doesn't, I mean, it is catastrophic on a level that we don't even understand. Because just think about what this means. Texas now, as I just said, if you really think about it, they have gotten commitments from the number one quarterback in the class of 2021, Quinn Ewers, who was obviously originally 2022, reclassified, goes to Ohio State, transfers to Texas. He's supposed to be transformative in his own right. Now, on top of it, you got the number one quarterback in the class of 2023. And this is why it's so interesting. If you can't build a national title contender centered around 2 5-star number one recruits in the class, especially in the NIL era, where you have more NIL money to spend than anyone, I don't know if it will ever happen for Texas. And so to me, this is just fascinating because this is either going to be the moment in time that Steve Sarkisian, for all the criticism, really does elevate this program. Really does take them from 5-7. This year they're good. They start to build around Quinn Ewers. And then 2024, 2025, that's when they take off under Arch. Or if it doesn't go well, then we know what's going to happen from there. Sark might be fired. Arch might transfer, and this might be a PR disaster that even the likes of Texas hasn't seen. That's why it's so interesting to me. It is going to go one of two extreme directions. Extreme. Again, if you cannot build a national championship caliber roster around 2 5-star number 1 ranked quarterbacks, one in the class of 2021, that's really kind of a 2022 kid, and then 2023, it might never happen for Texas. So absolutely fascinating. Congratulations to Arch Manning. I hope he enjoyed today and he enjoyed the moment. We can make fun of Texas, but the day that you pick what college you're going to or what the next step in your life is, if you have a job offer or something, it's a really cool day. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor. Make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube channel. We're going to really ramp up the college football stuff coming up. Appreciate your support. Make sure to subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. Thank you for listening to this segment.